Moshiach, Beriasa Moshiach Ani Mahamid.
We are fragile echoes and hovering memories of the old, young, and unborn who never lived to fulfill fated existence. We once vibrantly trod the earth like you, your neighbor, and itinerant stranger. We used to weep, laugh, scream, and love. Now we are memorial voices. Hear us, recite our Kaddish. Jackboots violently stole our comprehending eyes, our gold and ivory tortured teeth, our prophetic words. You who have speech, strive to recite our history. We are the Lord's lamented lesson.
I was only a child when I first heard them whisper stories of suffering, sorrow and death. 6 million souls now gone, not forgotten. I'm a child of a survivor.
I was only a young child, and I went over to him and I leaned over his boots and I started crying and begging him. I said, you know, if you want to kill my mom, why don't you kill me first?
I just spoke to somebody who came from that camp. He's about 85 years old, and he was telling me about the shooting of the 106 children. So I said I was among them. He was in the same camp, and he said, you were the 106. So they only killed the 105.
My father, realizing what's going on here and what's going to happen, said to me and two of my brothers, children, go back, go over there, save yourself, and if you survive, remember to carry on with Jewish life and Jewish tradition.
Have you heard the news? Do you know the news? Do you know what it's like to hear the cry of the Jews?
Come, take this giant leap with me into the other world, the other place, where language fails and imagery defies, denies our consciousness and dies upon the altar of insanity. Come, take this giant leap with me into the other world, the other place, and trace the eclipse of humanity where children burned while nations stood by. And the universe has yet to learn why. Has yet to learn why. The most amazing, bizarre memory of dancing with my father in a camp where I sneaked into his barracks, and he said that he and I never had a chance to dance together.
The scars are there, the fears, the mistrusts, the actual. I still have trouble with uniforms, even if it's a policeman directing traffic.
While millions of other members of cultural and political groups were also murdered by the Nazi regime, the term Holocaust generally applies to the attempted annihilation of the Jews of Europe. In an increasingly brutal sequence of events carried out against Jews in European countries, civil rights were repealed and possessions were seized. Jews were segregated into ghettos and ultimately deported to concentration camps. Some were simply shot on sight. Others were forced to dig their own graves. Many witnessed the murder of their own family members. What happened to the Jews during the 12-year reign of the Nazis was so horrific, especially in a modern era, that a new term to describe it had to be invented.
There were things that needed to be said that hadn't been said in the book, and he wanted to talk more about it, and began talking to me about it. And he warned me. He asked me if I would really be able to stand the feelings and to put the kind of effort and energy into listening to the story that he knew it would take. It became clear that the stories were never ending, that he had been through so much and he had seen so many things, and that they were with him on a daily basis in a way that he did not feel anybody could understand.
The Holocaust is the standard for comparison. It is the paradigm for genocidal threats. When we confront the charged moral questions of existence of violence, anti-Semitism, genocidal threats, racism, and discrimination, we realize that these concepts do not belong to the past centuries. They are still with us today. Narratives by Holocaust survivors personalize and give voice to the seemingly faceless 6 million murdered European Jews. We need to listen to them. We need to read them.
My father was in Auschwitz, Finnefteich, and Gerlitz for a period of about 2.5 years. My mother was in the Lodz Ghetto, the Auschwitz, and also Bergen-Belsen. Both of them were liberated in 1945 and came to the United States in 1950. I never met my grandparents, and as it turns out, through a complex series of events, we were able to find the graves of my mother's grandparents who died in the Lodz Ghetto in 1941 and 1942. We placed headstones, my mother together with my siblings as well as my nephew, and my mother said, the reason I survived Bergen-Belsen was so that I should be able to place a headstone for my grandparents together with my children and my grandchildren.
So it happened that from a Jewish community of about 70,000 Jews, among the 200 who gathered the day of our liberation in Vilna, I and my mother, we were among them. So the chances were very, very, very meager.
At the end of 1944, we were taken out from Auschwitz, sent to a concentration camp called Stutthof. We had a little flicker of hope, saying if we came out from Auschwitz alive, maybe somehow there will be a miracle will happen now, and we might be able to survive. But coming to Stutthof was not much better than Auschwitz, although there were no gassing or cremating, but the conditions there were so miserable, so bad, that people were falling like flies.
You know what it's like to hear the cry of 6 million Jews.
The recorded history of the Jewish people is one of persecution, displacement, and massacre, from exile in Babylon to destruction and slavery under the Roman Empire, to the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, ghettoization in Europe, and Russian pogroms. In every country of residence until only recently, Jews have been subjected to exclusionary laws and regulations, denied basic rights and freedoms. However, the brutality exercised against the Jews by the Nazi regime during World War II was unparalleled and remains so to this day.
I had a wonderful childhood. I never was afraid until I started going to school, where one day at recess, one of the little girls called me a dirty Jew. I was shocked. I was stunned. I remember I came home crying and asking my mom, how could she call me a dirty Jew? I took a shower this morning.
And we were an obstacle to Poland, an obstacle because we were also called kikes, Hebes, Shylocks. We were the dogs, the Satan's children, and everything under the sun we were labeled as the Christ killers, and we were the ones who were against Christ. But this is how we lived in Poland, with people door by door, side by side, and these same people told on us where we were hiding. These same people, Polish people, were calling the Germans and telling them, here are Jews.
My mom knew a farmer, and she said to him, I have my only child. If you could save my child, I'll give you all my estate. So you will have something after the war. He kind of agreed to it, and he kept me for about 6 months until the neighbors started squawking. They said, we know she's not one of your children. If you won't let her go, our village will disappear. And of course he had to let me go. My mom was hiding in the woods in a bunker with another 2 families. The woods, we didn't have any clothing, any food. So at night we would have to find some mushrooms or blueberries, and sometimes we went and we took potatoes from the field.
But Jews were not the only victims of the Nazis and their collaborators, who massacred all they deemed racially or ideologically inferior. The total Nazi death count has been estimated by genocide scholars to number nearly 21 million people. They included millions of gypsies, homosexual men, Jehovah's Witnesses, the handicapped, including German handicapped, certain Slavic citizens, prisoners of war, political dissidents, and anyone who dared to resist.
Dachau was the big camp, which we later visited, but we didn't know about these sub-camps. As we were coming in to this little place, the SS troops had set fire to the barracks with the people inside. A few of them had gotten out, and it turns out that they were all gypsies, Roma, and maybe 400, 500 prisoners in this sub-camp. And now this was less than 2 weeks before the end of the war. The Germans knew the war was over. We knew that it was going to be over soon. As a matter of fact, prisoners, the Germans, were surrendering by the hundreds every day. And I remember, a day or two before that, a company of Germans were marching down the road towards us and said, we want to surrender. And we said, well, we don't have any more room today. Come back tomorrow. I mean, it was ridiculous. We knew the war was going to be over. They knew it. And yet, they set fire to these barracks in order to kill them.
I was saved by a boyfriend who secured me false papers. And I survived on false papers in Sudetenland. My original name was Stella Sławin, maiden name, Penzer, married name. However, on false papers, my name was Sabina Gąsiorowska, a Polish name, of course. When I was liberated by the Russians, I took my false paper and threw it into the river Elbe. I said, no more Sabina Gąsiorowska, I am Stella Sławin.
Following an unsuccessful 1923 coup of the local government in Munich, Hitler served 6 months at the Landsberg prison. There he wrote his manifesto, Mein Kampf, in which he wrote angrily about the end of World War I. Only fools, liars, and criminals could hope in the mercy of the enemy. In these nights, hatred grew in me, hatred for those responsible for this deed. He also first outlined categories of human appearance and deemed the German Aryan the master race model.
My father was able to get a pushcart, And I remember that we loaded the pushcart with a mattress, with some pots and pans, with some bedding. We all dressed in many, many layers so we could have enough clothing. I think I put 6 pairs of socks in my ski boots. I wore many sweaters. And I mostly remember my mother told me to polish the mail slot in our front door. And I remember as we were ready to leave, I turned around and looked at my house, the only place I ever knew, because I was born. My parents brought me into that apartment, and that was my home. And I looked at, everything was intact. The furniture was there, still clothes hanging in the closet, the linen closet was full, there were things in the pantry, and we had to walk out. We had to turn the key into the superintendent of the building. We walked down the stairs. I tried to knock at the door of some of my neighbors that we used to be very friendly with. Nobody came to the door. I walked outside. We started to walk away. I turned back and I looked at the windows, and I could see all the neighbors peering at us behind the curtains. And so we walked through the narrow streets of Krakow, over the river, over the bridge, into what was going to be our new home, new jail, the ghetto.
I was one of only 2 Jewish cooks in the whole area that now is the Czech Republic, and was working in a dining hall maintained by the Jewish community officials for the immigrants from Poland, which meanwhile was also run over by the Germans. The manager was a member of the Jewish officials, and he told me he has been designated to become a member of a council of elders in a ghetto to be created to hold all the Czech Jews. And he would appreciate if I volunteer to go with the very first group to set up kitchens and train people to take care of all those deported who will be concentrated there. He wanted to sweeten the request by saying that if I do volunteer, he would protect my parents from being deported further to the east from this ghetto.
One day, they told us we're gonna leave there because this factory became ammunition factory. So we went to another camp, Merzdorf. And in Merzdorf, we worked some in the weaving factory and some unloading coals, and very little to eat, you know. But then they told us we're going to move again. So they took us to a larger camp, Greenberg. And we were like 1,000 girls, and they were 2,000 girls altogether. And we worked in 2 shifts.
There, in that camp, must have been about close to 1,000 people, children included. This was quite a rare thing that people were sent with their kids. We must have been about 200, 250 kids in that camp. There in that camp, I saw my father at night forging some false coins, false rubles. I said, what do you need these for? They were made of copper and then polished so that they would look like gold. He said, you never know. They sometimes may help us. Well, when the German trucks arrived to pick up the children and send them for destruction, and somehow with my mother and another 2 kids, we found ourselves hidden in a tiny room. And the door of that room was then covered up with all sorts of debris, so that it would not appear that there is a door there behind which I was hiding with these other 2 kids. My father was in that corridor, and when some German soldiers came and started to move the stuff to see what there was behind it, he very quickly pushed, I think, a ruble or 2 rubles into the hand of that soldier. The soldier clasped what he thought was really something of great value, put it in his pocket, and kept on moving. And this is how I survived.
I understand that I is the blues man. The blues man is I. I is the adornment we forge whenever we shackle a human freedom. I is an eagle's feather trampled beneath final solution. I is the shamed thighs of all raped women demanding their rapist's death as my retribution. Blues man, I is a black boot-stepping, goose-stepping, stomping down the doors of scapegoats. Blues man, the screaming stream of ash that blackened the skies above Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, and Auschwitz. I is the knocking, I is the door, I is that voice both harsh and warm. I is the last bit of will your pain cannot kill, that fine thread of life in life's tapestry of storms. Listen to the jangling discord of my sonata, and hear within its pale blue murmuring this thin cry of hope. Listen to the single flower fighting while sighing her way through the cracks of concrete, and hear I split wind and cheat death with this breath of human survival. I is the blues man. The blues man is I.
We got to the border, to the Russian border, but then we couldn't escape because the Germans were there on the road, patrolling the road, and you couldn't go from one place to the other. As I pointed out before, that we could go through the woods, but you would have to walk day and night on roads, wood roads, and get to the border, and then you would have to wait in the woods for the border to open to allow you in. Now, we could have done that if we would have been persistent about it. We could have done it, but it wasn't. We didn't do it, and my parents gave me away to a Christian family. They gave them some heirloom, and they took me in. They were nice to me. When they started facing the heat, the Germans were putting out placards saying, if you harbor Jews, it will be death. So the Polish people took me and brought me to the woods. They didn't give me up to the German people, but they took me, brought me to the woods, and I lived in the woods with some other families.
In 1944, with the unmoving of the Russian army, the camp in Sarajevo was closed, and we were sent what was then believed to be on our last destination, Auschwitz. We heard about Auschwitz, we knew what's taking place in Auschwitz, and this was the last trip. I arrived in Auschwitz. Again, their selection took place by Dr. Mengeles, who at that time I didn't know who it was, but later on I found out who Dr. Mengeles was. And again, those that, according to Dr. Mengeles, were capable and strong enough to continue to perform slave labor were put on one side, and the others in a different column. The other column of friends and relatives of ours who we were together with marched in one direction. We never saw them again, but we imagined what happened to them. Seeing the gas chambers and the smoke coming out from the crematoriums, I and my 2 brothers were placed in the camp and assigned to work. I was working at the Canal Reinigers, so-called sewer cleaners. The only thing is there were no sewers in Auschwitz. It was toilets. I was assigned to Canal Reinigers, and that was meaning cleaning the toilets.
Each of those who took part in various resistance movements are shining examples of individuals who bravely followed conscience in the fate of consequence. Many are recognized as Righteous Among the Nations at the Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Authority in Jerusalem. Sempo Sugihara, the Japanese consul based in Lithuania, who, acting on his own, issued Japanese transit visas to nearly 6,000 Jews. Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg, who saved tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews before he disappeared. The village people of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon in France, who hid 5,000 Jews in private homes and nearby farms. And big-hearted Nazi industrialist Oskar Schindler.
Plaszow, the camp, was a horror, like all the camps. We still work in the workshops that were moved. And at the time, I started hearing about Oskar Schindler. Oskar Schindler, who, of course, came to Krakow because he wanted to become rich. He knew he was going to be able to get a good business, which he did. He took over a factory called Emalia, where they were making pot and pans before the war. And with the help of the people who owned it and who worked there, he was able to make a fortune. And so when Oskar Schindler made a deal with Amon Get, the sadistic, brutal commander of Plaszow, he made a deal with him that he was going to build a camp next to his factory, because he said his people were spending too much time walking back and forth from Plaszow to the Emalia. And at the time he also requested that they send 150 more women and especially children with skinny hands. And because we knew Marcel Goldberg, whom was making the list, he actually was a friend of my father, and he and his wife and sister shared our tiny room in the ghetto. And so he put my mother and me on the list. And we went to work for Oskar Schindler. So we were taken away out of hell. We were grabbed away from a sadistic, brutal murderer. And we went to Emalia, which was heaven. And we were put in care of Oskar Schindler, who took care of us. He was like an angel for us. And to me, he became like my father. This was my father, was somebody who really cared.
They took all the Jews from the ghetto and they put us into a square. And there they were separated, the men on one side, the women and children on the other side. And we didn't realize what they're going to do with the men. They put the men on the trucks and they took them out of town. And they made them dig big graves, and then they lined them up, 6 in a row. They shot the 6, and the living had to watch for the one that died. And then they shot again 6 more, and until they killed them all. How do we know exactly what happened? One of the men that was on top wasn't quite dead. He came back to the city and told us where the graves were and what happened. That's how we know.
Bergen-Belsen, I think, to me, was worse than Auschwitz. It was really a death trap. And everybody was very sick with typhus, and we had no food at all and no work. We did stand on the roll call for hours, sometimes for 14 hours. You had to stand straight or you would be either beaten or shot. And many of us were much too sick to stand straight. And I had this secret weapon that I would fantasize and write poetry in my head. How do we ever begin to mourn the generations never to be born? A leader, a hero, an heir to a nation, a builder, an artist, a healer, a clown. The cures undiscovered, the music unwritten, all the dreams undreamt or shattered or broken. Unimagined treasure, the losses unmeasured, unwept for, unspoken.
when the Germans came nearer to Stalingrad, in Leningrad, we had an occasion to find two people, Russian people, what they was sent over there, and they talked to us, they will make a raft to go on the ocean. We decided, because living in this position what we was impossible. They make for us a raft. And there was a storm on the ocean. Finally, with God's will, 6 days on the ocean, without bread, without nothing. The lice was eating us up.
In this camp, I was for 7 months. And it was so hard to survive in this camp. I picked up dead people and brought them on a wagon, and we brought them to the crematorium to be burned, and they couldn't keep up with the burning.
I remember looking around and becoming aware of a horrible smell. There was such stench in Auschwitz. And I also remember that we were very thirsty, and we saw that it was snowing. And we tried to catch some of the snowflake, and we realized those were ashes. And we were told to run. We were always told to run by the Germans. They were always beating us and yelling and screaming, heraus, heraus, mach schnell. And we came to a halt in front of a big barrack. And there was a group of very well-fed and well-dressed German officers. I didn't know it at the time, but the one standing there was Mendel, the angel of death in Auschwitz. And with the rest of, with the flick of the wrist, we said to go left, go right, go left to right. I see myself in that line. And so we saw the people, women going to the left, barely walking, exhausted from the trip, traumatized. And so the woman in my group, my mother and I, we started to pinch our cheeks, so we would look healthy.
How can we understand the death of 6 million? I know the minds of those set free. Liberation brought to life. They all are inspiring.
I got friendly with 3 sisters, and we were together. They took care of me because I was the youngest. So we didn't know what to do, but one of the sisters said, let's stay behind. We'll see what's going to happen. So when they assembled the whole group, and we stayed behind. And then we saw a French soldier, and he told us if we can survive a week, we're going to be liberated, because the Russian or the American, he wasn't sure who going to liberate us. So we saw so many soldiers and so many evacuees, from everybody was running in different directions.
These were volunteering firemen. When they saw this group of about 10 men, women, the child among them, and so on, the head of them said, keep them here, I am running to get the Germans. It was clear that we came to the end of our existence. And when he ran out from the gate of that building, a stray bullet hit him in the stomach. He fell to the ground. The people who were supposed to hold us there so that the Germans would take care of us ran to see what happened to him. And here I am sitting today.
So my parents decided they would take a chance. What they did is they timed the guards that were guarding the barbed wire that was surrounding the ghetto so that they would be able to go to the barbed wire and dig a hole the size of a 6-year-old so I could escape. They managed to do that at the risk of their lives, of course. And the miracle is that when the time came for me to do it, and they again timed the guards and the dogs and the searchlights, I was actually able to crawl under that barbed wire and be here with you today.
And then there was an order from Himmler that no inmates from concentration camps should fall in the Allies' hands. They all had to be destroyed. And so we were put on the dead march, being taken. What we later found out was abundant salt mines.
I decided to escape, risking to be shot on the escape, which really was not a risk, it was only a 50% risk. I slipped into the ditch alongside the road, lying face down in the snow, motionless, and there was a zealous guard who did shoot me, but maybe because of the dark, he shot me under the arm. The bullet got stuck in a rib and the blood spread over the snow, which was good because nobody else attempted to waste a bullet for somebody who lost that much blood.
Sabina Goszorowska, I worked in Bodenbach on the River Elbe in Feldfabrik of Joseph Frind. And people there were pretty peaceful, and they accepted us, the Polish girls. We worked there. And until liberation, on the 5th of May, the Russians, 1945, the Russians came and liberated us. And all of a sudden, I did not have to be afraid. However, we were afraid of something else. We were women, and the Russians were starved for sex. And of course, we were young. And we were afraid of them. Not afraid of being Jewish, but afraid of being violated by the Russians. Folk dancing purifies me, cures me of my sadness, cures me of depression. Folk dancers have no prejudices. They embrace everybody. Whoever wants to dance just comes and dances. And they are very tolerant even when people are not terribly skillful in folk dancing.
We came back to Poland. I want to see somebody was alive. We came at Poland with a 3 months baby. They knock at the door at night. This was after, that was 1945 already, 1946, when we came to Poland. They knock on the door, they open. We don't need Jewish people anymore. If you are not running away tomorrow, we will kill you, baby.
We stayed in the woods till about beginning of 45. We were there about 3 years like that. We were living there. But then the partisans went by through the woods. They said, whoever's in the woods, you can join us. And that's how my mom and I were saved. And we were supposed to go back to our home where we used to live before. But when we came there, the Ukrainians didn't want to give back our property, so they started killing the people. And when we heard that, we escaped in the middle of the night by train to Poland. And from Poland, we went to a displaced camp where we stayed for 5 years.
We finally got out of the camp and we saw soldiers, and there came a soldier, one soldier, on a tank. And he jumped off the tank. He jumped off the tank and he gave me a little food that he was eating out of a can. So I just took a little bit with my fingers and I put it in my mouth and I gave it to my brother. And then I fell down. I fell down to his feet and I kissed his boots. And he tried to pick me up. And he gave me a flag, 48 stars. I did not know it was a flag. I thought it was a handkerchief because I was crying to wipe off my tears. Later on, after he disappeared over the horizon, I saw a flag. When the Americans came, they brought the flag to the Dachau camp like they brought the flag to all the other places where they went. I was saying that I must go to America, where these people are coming from. Such compassionate people, such sensitive people, but yet they knew how to shoot and they knew how to be rough and tough. How were they like that? How did they manage to get like that?
There were 3 prisoners of war in that camp. And one was black, one was British, 2 were American. And as soon as the army, liberating army, came in, they put uniforms on these prisoners of war. And I honor all liberators with that poem, My Black Messiah. A black GI stood by the door. I never saw a black before. He'll set me free before I die, I thought. He must be the Messiah. A black Messiah came for me. He stared with eyes that didn't see. He never heard a single word which hung absurd upon my tongue. And then he simply froze in place. The shock, the horror on his face. He didn't weep, he didn't cry, but deep within his gentle eyes, a flood of devastating pain, his innocence forever slain. But there's a special bond we share, which has grown strong because we dare to live, to hope, to smile, and yet we vow not ever to forget.
6 weeks after liberation, with some other liberated prisoners, we went on our way home to Prague and arrived there 2 days after the war ended. I immediately went to Terezin to check whether my parents are there, and they were there. The man who made his promise kept his word, but I couldn't find out how he did it because he himself didn't survive.
The French wanted to know who I am, and am I from a concentration camp? Brought into the headquarters, and they started to ask me questions. I told them I'm from a concentration camp not far from here. I'm looking for family, and they started to ask me whether I know of any people that were killed or died in that camp, whether there is a grave. And I said, yes, I know there is a mass grave right there. I know where it is because at the end, when that camp was liquidated, I was assigned to a group, to the commando, to bury the bodies that were laying there in the camp. They were very much interested in it. And right away, they put me in a jeep and we went to the area that mass grave, digged up the bodies, made the German people from the villages come out and dig out the bodies. They ordered every person from the village to bring a white sheet that was laid out at the edge near the grave, and they were ordered to take out the bodies and lay it out on the white sheets. And then people from all the nearby villages were ordered out to walk by and see what they did to the people.
Colonel Sparks, the battalion commander, his lead elements were on tanks, and they had already passed the town of Dachau when he got this order. So he took his reserve company, who was walking, he reconned the site, found the back gate by going over a railroad siding. So they entered the back gate on a railroad siding into the back of the part of the industrial complex. And the first thing they came across were 39 boxcars of dead bodies. These inmates at Buchenwald had been loaded on these trains. 8 trains, about 40 cars in each train, roughly 3,000 to 4,000 inmates from Buchenwald. 1 train per day for 8 days, and the last train was loaded on the 9th of April, and the camp, Buchenwald, was liberated on the 11th. That's how close they came to interrupting this, moving these inmates out. And the inmates were loaded in deplorable conditions, crowded into boxcars, some locked in the cars, not enough food but for maybe 3 or 4 days, and very little water. But yet these trains were moving for 25 days in some cases.
There are people today who want to deny that the Holocaust existed, or that they may have died from disease or from malnutrition or something. We saw it. We were witnesses to this. And the president of Iran cannot say that it didn't exist. And there are deniers in every country, including this country, that say, well, maybe it didn't exist. General Eisenhower made a very strong point that at some point in the future people will deny it. And I'd like to add my voice. I was a lowly sergeant, but I agree with General Eisenhower. It has to be remembered. It has to be remembered so that it doesn't happen again, not only to Jews, but to any people who are suffering from genocide.
You know, the Bible talks about the evil that men do will continue for 4 generations, whereas God's good lasts for 1,000 generations. And you can see that because it's 4 generations till your grandfather or great-grandfather or grandparents no longer have a direct impact on you. And so things that affect someone last to his progeny and the progeny afterwards. And I see that in my own parents and how that's affected me, and in how my children still relate to the experience.
I was only a child when I first heard them whisper stories of suffering, sorrow, and death.
As the son of a Holocaust survivor, my sister and I learned at a very early age the importance of understanding what it means to be humane, what it means to be caring, what it means to value the most needy among us in society. Those were values that were passed to me. Many other values as well, but that probably is what led me into choosing a career where I help those who are most vulnerable, help those who are most needy. This is the lesson that my sister and I were taught. We both been very involved in public service, and it's no wonder. Those are the lessons that we've received.
From their stories of life, I caught all their tears. They felt like they died, so I buried their blues. I absorbed their pain. My heart is so heavy. I'm a child of the survivor, and the sorrow will rise. Have you heard the news? Do you know the blues? Do you know what
The Holocaust has had a profound effect on me, as well as on my religious observance, which are really inseparable. My father, when he came to the United States, was worried what would happen to the family, what would happen to Judaism, what would happen to our Yiddishkeit, what would happen to our religious observance. He saw how we could develop in the United States and how he could be proud and how his parents would have been proud.
As the child of a survivor who basically didn't have a large family because of the people that were lost in his family, I decided to work in generations after, which one of its main things is to make certain that the history of the Holocaust is never forgotten and that the people that were killed were individual people, that each one had a value and a life that was important that was taken away from them. And it's very important that the world never forget, so hopefully it will never happen again.
I was born December 2nd, 1944 in Rovno, Ukraine. My parents were partisans. My father was a partisan commander fighting against the Nazis. It's a myth to say that Jews all walked like sheep to slaughter. There were many that fought back, and I'm very proud of my parents for fighting back. They gave me a very important message, which I've used today in my work in the International Association of Genocide Scholars, that never again means never again for anybody. That we should all work for the saving of lives of any nation, any tribe, any group.
My parents survived the Nazi occupation of Paris, and they each found their own escape. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, there was a silence that came across the world, and this silence came into individual homes for children of survivors. It is that silence that has intrigued me. Over the years, I have seen a process emerge for the second generation development. You want to learn your family's experience, your parents' experience. Learn your family's roots and identities. Know where you come from and your family. And then you want to understand your own, how it all affected you. With this understanding, I have found that people then come together.
The Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies was started about a decade ago by Dr. Deborah Dwork, who is a historian and the director of the center. The original idea behind it was to establish the Center for the Study of the Holocaust. But soon the program was expanded, its mandate was expanded to include other genocides in general and the Armenian genocide in particular. So we do have a chair in Armenian modern history and Armenian genocide. Our focus is basically to educate doctoral students to prepare future historians and researchers in the Holocaust and genocide, comparative genocides. It is a rigorous and carefully structured doctoral program. It is the only program in the United States.
After 17 tribes, the Ottomans took over Anatolia piece by piece. They had forced the minorities that included Jews, Greeks, Assyrians, all as second-class citizens. They were never first-class citizens, never. If a person was Armenian, they had to wear red to identify by their clothing. If they were walking on a path and a Turkish person was walking, they had to step aside, give the path to these people, then go on. They couldn't ride a horse. They were not allowed to be in military service, and they were taxed twice as much than the Turks. Wangenheim was the German ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. In 1909, he was talking with the German Chancellor Bülow in Athens. This information was coming from Prime Minister Şevket Pasha.
saying that the Ottoman government has already decided to exterminate the minorities in the Ottoman Empire. My uncle, his name was Sarkis, he was 19 years old, and they made him dig a ditch. And they start shooting them, one by one, from behind. The bullet went through his ear. He threw himself into that ditch and stayed there for 3 days and 3 nights without moving an inch, among the dead and the dying. Germans, they called the Armenians vermin. Now, if you look in history, the Nazis, they called the Jews vermin. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Same training, same vision.
I have been involved in Holocaust education, deeply involved for the last 30 years. This Holocaust Center, Boston North.
I was involved in starting Facing History in Ourselves in the Brookline Public Schools back in the 1970s.
For Facing History in Ourselves, Holocaust education really happens on 2 levels. First is about historical understanding, getting another generation of people growing up, learning history in their schools to really deeply understand what happened and examine the events of the Holocaust in depth. There's a second level, though, of that education that's equally important, which is for students to look at history in order to understand more about their responsibilities today. How can we become more responsible members of our own community? How can we, in fact, prevent our own communities from falling apart the way that these communities in Europe literally fell apart during this terrible period in history? So whenever we're doing education about the Holocaust, we really have an opportunity, but even more, I think, an obligation to be working on both levels.
I constantly go through my life with almost like a feeling that I have a fire burning within me, because I feel that all of the institutions, all of the families, all of Judaism was destroyed in Poland and in the Holocaust. Hardly anything was left. Warsaw alone used to have 200,000 to 300,000 religious Jews. Today there are 40 Orthodox Jews in all of Warsaw. Truly a Holocaust. And I feel that it's because of the sacrifices of the prior generation, my parents' generation, that have taught me that we have to do everything we can to rebuild our institutions and rebuild Judaism to make it even bigger and better than it was in the past.
Not believe what we were seeing. The still burning bodies were strewn about with their scorched, striped clothing. My mind was numb, and all I could think of was that our chaplain was not a Jew, and someone has got to say Kaddish. On my left were the poor smoldering souls on the ground in front of the huts. Not one was alive. And on my right, the piles of starved to death, dehumanized skeletal bones, awaiting the boxcars to take them to the Evans in Dachau. And so, as I walked from hut to hut, I began to daven Kaddish. Yiskadav Yiskadash Shemei Rabah, B'yol Mor Divrochi V'sei.
Yamlich Malchusei. בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגולה ובזמן קוריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבא מבורך לעולם ומעולמיו. יספורך וישתבח ויספואר וישרומם ויסנשא, ויסדר ויסלה ויסלול שמי דקודשו בריחו. לאלו מן כל ברכוסו וסירוסו תושבחוסו ונחמוסו דמירון ביולמו ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיו וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן.
The New York DA, Robert Morgenthau, said, if the world reacted to the genocide of Armenians, Hitler would be reluctant to go and kill Jews in wholesale fashion. So basically, my message is, genocide exists, it's happening right now, and we're not doing much about it, except talking and talking and talking.
I used to say, never again, 30 years ago perhaps. And I don't do that anymore because we have not learned enough from this history. We are repeating the same horrors. We are repeating genocide, and I am very upset. On the other hand, if we didn't do what we're doing, it might even be worse.
I want to live in a world where there are no more wars and there will never be a Holocaust again, where everyone gets along.
You cannot just sit by when you see injustice done. And I see from young people, more and more people, I see children and young people now trying to run bake sales or car washes to raise money for Darfur. Because while we thought that we would be the last to witness atrocities and ethnic cleansing, it didn't happen. The world did not learn anything.
This film is a portrait of the ongoing legacies of those still among us, those without even the graves of loved ones to visit, those who courageously continue to live their best within the walls and chains of the stark, unforgiving past. Their stories must be told. Their histories must never be forgotten. As genocide continues in our modern world, may the lessons of the Holocaust, the memory of its victims, and the bravery of its survivors and witnesses teach us to always strive toward the achievement of peaceful human coexistence.
We're here. Our seeds are planted in the land. We're here. Although they thought we'd die at their command. We're here. And no one ever will erase our stand. We're here to love again, to live, begin again to give.
רחמים שוכן במרוממים המצא מנוחנכנו תחת כנפי השכינו במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר כי המזהירים את נשמות אחינו בני ישראל הקדושים והטהורים שנפלו בידי רוצחים ונשפכו דמם באושוויץ מיידנק טרבלינקה ושאר מחנות השמד באירופה שנהרגו ושנשרפו ושנשחטו ושנקברו חיים מכל מיסוס משונוס ויחזריוס על קידושס השם בעבור שאנחנו ביניהם בנושאיהם אחריהם ויחיוסיהם נודרים צדוקו בעד הזכרוס נשמוסיהם בגני